I'm squeezing my lungs.
Hey, welcome to the Aspirian LARP cast. I am Jam. Got E Diddy with me.
What up?
And we're unfortunately not joined by Chow today, but that's okay. We're excited to get into episode 2 with you guys. We are still trying to figure out things as far as getting the podcast set up, so just bear with us if we sound weird. We're trying to work through it.
We're currently just using one mic between the two of us, so it might come in at weird angles.
Yeah.
Still some setup.
Yeah, so we're smoking cigars in the apartment. Looks like Diddy's actually almost out of a cigar.
We've been trying this a lot.
So I'm smoking a Rocky Patel that I got from Burn in Pittsburgh.
That's like a name brand cigar.
It's pretty good.
Yeah. I have a Nub Nuance single roast. Still name brand, but I don't think it's like a Rocky Patel level. It's like second, third tier.
They're good.
They're good still. I'm not saying they're not.
We got a second one there for you. Just drinking. I'm drinking a Red Bull. Ethan's drinking a seltzer water. That's what you heard at the beginning. He's enjoying his Polar Orange Vanilla.
It's
all right.
vanilla.
It's vanilla. Sorry. All right, so we're gonna get into it. 1 John chapter 3 is the scripture we're getting into, and this is the overarching scripture theme that we're thinking through for Act 2 of Season 3. 1 John chapter 3 verses 16 through 18 says, "By this we know love, that he laid down his life for us, and we ought to lay down our lives for the brothers. But if anyone has the world's goods and sees his brother in need, yet closes his heart against him, how does God's love abide in him? Little children, let us not love in word or talk, but in deed and truth." All right, so be thinking through that scripture as we're talking through it. Ethan and I are just going to kind of go back and forth talking through this recap, and then we're going to focus on some characters and some biblical themes that we see throughout it. So when we get into it, we start out with the battle at the Red Keep. This is 2 seasons that are kind of building up and then have been building up to the army of the dead and the living. How do we break that up, Ethan?
How we break that up? We see it beginning with different parties of characters coming together to defend different sections of the wall, and the king's coming between all 3 of them. We see Prince Cody and Nomad defending their section, but they ultimately fail in their defense, but they escape with their lives. Jared, Hal Stevens, and Elliot meet a similar end to their section of the wall. Both escape with their lives once again. And then we see Siv and Balder, against all odds, defending the third and final section of the wall, cutting off one entryway the others could have.
Well, I think you guys were successful because Siv had the giant battle axe.
Yeah.
I know Tila couldn't stop talking about how much she loved having a battle axe.
I remember there's some people, I think, was it Chow or someone else, just like, I couldn't get near her. She kept poking.
She's really good with that.
Yeah.
Of course, the king is going in between all of these parties, and so the king was kind of coming and helping each party as he could. I know there was one party he didn't even get a chance to come and help. You guys failed so quickly. So, yeah, the others get in. They break down 2 of the 3 walls that needed to be protected. So the Valley Keep is a triangular fortress, and so the others get in, and the army of the living is faced with then having to fight face to face with the army of the dead and no longer protecting walls. And then we see the other king coming in, and you got to play the other king a little bit. What happened before you got to play him?
What happened before I got to play him?
Yeah.
Oh, Balder got dragged to him. Chow started off playing the other king, so we're both about the same size, so both bigger, more intimidating men, and he just force grabs Balder basically to his hand, and as it's coming to his hand, he's just holding his sword out, so the sword goes straight through his chest upon impact with the other king's hand.
R.I.P. Balder.
Rip.
Yeah, so Balder is the first casualty that we see, and it seems like he might be the only casualty up until this point. And so, all the party has gotten together, where we had split into 2s. Now every party member is kind of coming in and out as the battle goes along. And so, we lose Balder, and then Ethan takes over playing the other king.
Yeah.
What were some of the points of the other king? What was he focused on, and what are some of the reasons for that?
The other king was focused solely on King James. Anyone playing another their focus was keeping other characters at bay. So, like, That way the other king could focus solely on King James, because the other king wanted the life rune within King James. So
he wants a life rune, and this is something that we've been working through for 2 seasons now. Mm-hmm. This idea of a death rune and a life rune. And so the life rune is embedded in the king's chest, and that's actually very similar to like Iron Man, in the fact that he had the arc reactor and it was killing him. We've been communicating at the end of season 2, the life rune was actually killing the king. And so it seemed like the others were interested in this life rune, and the other king wanted to get the life rune. And there's a deep lore behind that. You have a life rune and a death rune, which are fragments of Dominus' soul. And if both of them are put together, Dominus can be resurrected. And of course, we know that when the Solari came back in season 1?
Their first appearance was season 1, I believe. Camp Blackwood, around there.
No, it was Mount Ursine.
Oh, yeah.
Because they were traveling to the top of Mount Ursine to get that rune, and that's where the other king first pops up. And so they're coming to Ursine to get that rune because they're expecting to be able to resurrect Dominus. And so now you see the other king, for whatever reason, whoever that might be, is interested in getting that life rune. And so, that was his primary focus, get that life rune. Diddy got to play the other king and fight through that a little bit.
Yeah, that was a lot of fun. I had a big two-handed sword, but being the other king, I could use it with one hand. So I picked up Baldur's one-handed sword and dual wield, and
it was awful.
It was fun.
So we ultimately see each party member got a little bit of a chance to fight against the other king. Mm-hmm. It was cool seeing the prince and Jared kind of team up. It reminded me of season 1 when you were playing Arn before Arn died, and Jared was playing Lucius, and you guys were fighting. Was it the dragon, or you were fighting the Lich King?
Hunter, I think, was playing the Lich King.
That's right.
Because it was when
you guys were in the Undying Lands.
Went down.
Yeah.
And then we got up with our second wind abilities that were present in season 1.
Yep. Yeah, so it was just cool seeing you guys fight through that, and of course every party member got a chance to fight the other king, but ultimately we see something happen with the king of the living, King James. Mm-hmm. So similar to what we saw on top of Ursine, King James, knowing that the other king is coming for him, essentially Dahlia shields himself, destroying the life rune. And so that's significant because this event is what causes what we call the drop. Mm-hmm. And as Chow had communicated in episode 1, the drop is this severe event that takes place that kills 2/3 of the population of the entirety of the world, not just Asperia, but the entirety of the world. And the drop actually causes the crumble too, which is what we're calling it, where Thymeria itself, all the way up until the Undying Lands in Thymeria, completely crumble. And so you have a mass exodus of Thymerians coming 5 years later after this event, coming to Asperia and taking over. What were some of your thoughts on the king dying?
Some of my thoughts on the king dying. So, I don't know if I had a whole lot, because I was it was kind of planned out. Yeah. So, I know a lot of other people crushed, confused, like characters, or Elliot's rolling on the ground, blaming the elves. Prince Cody's just beginning his descent into hopelessness. And we see Jared of House Stevens just not even sure what to do. Yeah. Like, he's just standing there. The only one who had any sort of conscious response, I think, was Jarl Siv.
Yeah, which was interesting to see. She's not necessarily a woman of the valley, but she's kind of joined with the army of the living.
She's a leader in the marshlands.
She's the Jarl of the marshlands, yeah.
The Jarl?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. And so she's got it together somehow. She's trying to get everyone to get their stuff together, and you have Nomad, who's not even saying anything. He's just kind of looking at the prince, trying to figure out what's going on. That's where we leave the first part of Act 2.
I think with the Jarl, too, it helped that she's from the marshlands, so she doesn't have so great a tie to King James, other than King James agreed to help her people escape the others and be defended. Yeah,
and she sees the implications of the king's death, which I thought was kind of cool to see so many people interacting with his death in the way they did. Mm. King dies, and you start seeing Valley men dying, but then something also that's significant is the entire army of the dead gone. They just vanish. Most of them end up turning into dust and just completely gone along with the other king. And so there's a period of time that we call the jump, which is about 5 years after the events of the drop.
Or if you want it dramatic, the jump.
That's right. Yeah, so we see that the drop has greatly affected the world. We know Thymerians are exodusing to Asperia. We know that judges are taking over territories of Asperia. We know that essentially you have Solari trying to take over territories, and now this new threat, which is known as the Knights of Meraxis, they're taking over as well. And so we have Queen Jennifer Skinnifer, and she is basically held up in Port Unide. And so Port Unide was where her father had ruled before he had gotten wed to Amanda Felix and was taking over Cobblestone. Cobblestone has been destroyed as a result of everything that happened. Check out episode 1 to figure out what happened. So now she's ruling 5 years later. She's ruling this small fragment of Aspirian people. And it's nowhere near the same size of rule that King James had. So...
Her kingdom's being called the New Valley, right?
Yeah, the New Valley is what we're calling that, her new kingdom, New Valley. And the whole idea behind that is essentially she's trying to provide a new glimmer of hope in a world that seems completely hopeless. So,
what happened to the Old Valley?
Well, the Old Valley is destroyed. That's a good question. The Old Valley is destroyed. Of course, we know that the heroes were supposed to protect portions of the wall, and they were unable to do so. And I had kind of mentioned how the others turn into dust. Dust is this magical entity that comes about as a result of the life rune being destroyed. You're going to be seeing this throughout the campaign, where there's going to be dust spots, for instance. And if you have a certain ability, you're going to be able to interact with those dust spots and see things that happened in the past, or even potentially see glimpses in the future. So dust spots will be randomly placed. We'll probably use an orb that glows, and you'll be able to interact with it that way. Also, you'll have abilities to be able to absorb dust and learn new abilities, things like that.
It's like a blue mage.
Almost like a blue mage or a red mage as well, where you use kind of both white magic and black magic at the same time. But yeah, so dust is this new thing where it's creating these enemies that are called the harrowing. And the harrowing are difficult. We describe them with think of like Call of Cthulhu. That's essentially what they kind of look like. They're really big, gangly looking creatures, tentacles for mouths, very hairy. They're black, and portions of their body are actually missing, and you just see dust particles as a result of it. And so the dust is creating even worse enemies as a result of the drop happening.
But I don't think the harrowing can. At this point, there's no known instances of the harrowing infecting people like the others.
That's right. Yeah, the others had a virus, and so zombies essentially. Yeah. You get bit, you're going to become one, which is unfortunately why we lost Arn. R.I.P.
R.I.P.
Yeah, so Arn got bit. And...
Chow, if you're listening, please don't cry a whole lot. We bring this up a lot. I know you're heartbroken. I'm sorry.
Yeah, so there's no known report of the harrowing actually infecting anyone. As far as we know, the dust is simply creating it, and no one's really getting infected and becoming a harrowing. So, yeah. So as we're moving on, we see that the Queen has called for the aid of Jared of House Stevens once more. She's called upon Jarl Siv, who's been helping her out. She's also been out in the marshlands with her people again. And then we have Elliot Apollos, the dwarf responsible for the war machines that destroyed the Valley Keep at the Battle of the Red Keep when Beowulf was defeated. That's Elliot Apollos. He's played by Hunter. And so the three of them are called to Port Unide, and they're met by Ethan of House Marshall and Briar. You want to talk about Ethan of House Marshall a little bit?
Yeah. So Ethan of House Marshall, he's a character more resembling, I think, just myself as a normal person, following a similar path of just kind of, I have to find the words.
Well, essentially what you're hearing with Ethan is how Ethan of House Marshall is kind of not scatterbrained, but has to think through what he's going to communicate. And so think Ethan, and that's Ethan of House Marshall, right?
Yeah, some more prep time because I'm able to think through what I'm going to say and what's coming up instead of just tell me about it. I was like, I wasn't prepared for this.
Yep. Yeah, and Ethan of House Marshall, he actually...
that big battle axe that Tila used earlier.
Yep.
Jarl Siv.
And he's a newer house, so his house has not been a night house. He actually started serving the queen during the attack at Cobblestone from the Solari and then the Knights of Meraxes. And so he started serving the queen there.
Before that point, his family was serving the king as blacksmiths.
Yep.
So helping with the Quicksilver endeavor. So
he was knighted by King James to be a knight and was actually assigned to protect the queen. And so he's been living out that vow that he took to protect Queen Jen. And he was actually aware of her being named the queen before the queen even got the letter that's stated. Briar and Ethan, they kind of relay this message to the three party members, Jared, Siv, and Elliot, and communicate that they need to go north. They need to go north to find the prince. There's been reports of the prince being up there, and of course no one's heard from the prince for 5 years. He started kind of going mad. He was scooping up all the dirt where the king had last stood, and he was saying the king was there, and he's sitting on the throne in the Broken Valley Keep and bawling and losing his mind. And so no one's seen him. Yeah, no one's seen him since that point. And so they're supposed to go north. They need to find the prince, and they're hoping to find the prince to bring some more hope to the people of New Valley. And along the way, while they're in Port Unade, they come upon this man in the Boar's Head Tavern called Geneva. And so Geneva is interesting. As a result of the drop, you have white magic, which would be like your healing magics and stuff like that, and then black magic, which is fire,
more
lightning,
attack magic.
Yeah,
elemental.
That you see in the mage class versus the cleric class. And essentially the drop ends up separating magics. And so where we had every class had some sort of healing ability, now in the remake of classes that Ethan had just kicked out, white magic or healing abilities are only for clerics. And so Geneva, he's a white mage, he's a cleric, and he's essentially created a mercenary group where he gets paid to go around and heal people. And so he claims to be a lord or a follower of the Lord of Light, rather. But we see he's kind of extorting people for money to use this gift of healing. And it just kind of reminds me of where you see in the gospel accounts, Jesus goes in and he's flipping tables and he's creating whips and whipping people out of the temple because the Jews have essentially taken the house of the Lord and made it a house of, or a den of robbers, is what they said, is what Jesus said. And so while Geneva claims to be a follower of the Lord of Light, and we do see him do some good, right? He gives, for instance, Elliot, who has a magical hand, because he lost his limb from carrying the orb a couple acts ago.
Which is better than no hand, but not as good as having
it's not as good as having one.
He's got like 3 fingers, so it's a little awkward.
Yeah, so Geneva does some good. He gives he prays over Elliot. Elliot claims to be a follower of the Lord of Light, and he prays over Elliot and gives him this trinket, and the trinket regrows his physical limb, so he doesn't have the magical limb anymore. Unfortunately, this goes to show Geneva as a character. Geneva does not communicate or explain that if Elliot were to lose that trinket or no longer be wearing it, his magical limb is going to return and his physical limb is no longer existent. So Geneva's kind of extorting. He's created this clerics guild, is what it's called, and you can hire clerics to come along with your party, and they'll do whatever you want. They have no alliance or allegiances towards anyone. They just kind of, wherever the money is, they're going to go and heal people.
So their idol is money and making money, probably money, fame, fortune, not actually serving the Lord of Light, but using it as a front.
Yeah, they use it as a front. And so, and what's interesting too, you get into the character of Elliot a little bit, and Ethan and I were talking about this a little bit. The whole lore behind the dwarves, they went to a place called the Deserted Lands. And it's called the Deserted Lands because the people of Aspiria said those are the lands where all the deserters live. And so the dwarves, after the others first originated, the dwarves left. They blamed the elves, and they end up going to the Deserted Lands, and you don't see them a whole lot in season 1. We start bringing them out a little bit in season 2. Well, Elliot wasn't around when the others first came onto the scene, but he's been raised hearing and believing certain things about the Lord of Light. The dwarves would teach that the Lord of Light has abandoned them, for instance. And he doesn't really, Elliot went from the Deserted Lands to then the Marshlands, and he was with Marshlanders for a while. And the Marshlanders, they practice in necromancy and demonic rituals, and they don't follow the Lord of Light, for instance. You have a lot of cannibalism happening within the Marshlands. And so he's kind of been swayed to and fro by what people communicate about the Lord of Light. And he's not really had a firm foundation on what it is that the Lord of Light teaches. And so I was just reminded of John 14:6, I'm the way, the truth, and the life. None shall come to the Father except for through me. Jesus says that himself. And we know that the Word of God is true. It's trustworthy. And the Word of God gives us all that is profitable for godly lives. And in the character of Elliot, he's been swayed to and from, but he has, just like Romans 1 communicates, he has a knowledge of God, though in some areas he suppresses the truth. And so we don't have Elliot with the people of the Lord of Light. He doesn't follow in the practices of the people of the Lord of Light, for instance. Once again, he's swayed, so he doesn't necessarily trust in or believe the teachings or all of the teachings of the Lord of Light. He cherry picks, if you will. And any instance we've seen Elliot interacting with that, the Lord of Light, the elves, all of that deep lore, it's usually, even in the instance of the king, he's pointing and blaming the elves and not taking into account his own actions. And then also his perception of the Lord of Light has kind of been skewed in certain ways. Any thoughts on that?
Do you mention Proverbs, isolation?
Oh, no. Go ahead, take it.
Do you want to say the quote?
Yeah. Proverbs 18 talks about he who isolates himself seeks folly, his own destruction. And so Proverbs 18 is talking about essentially the need to be with God's people, the need to be in community. And you don't see that necessarily with Elliot.
Yeah, or the dwarves at all, because the dwarves, they just pieced out after the other spawn. They're just, all right, the Lord of Light has deserted us, so we're just going to peace out and isolate ourselves to the deserted lands, because when they went there, they cut off contact with anyone that was outside of them for the most part. And they didn't have any significant interaction, I don't think, with anyone outside, right?
Yeah, no, and that's a good point too, is imagine what would have happened at the Battle of King's Fall if the dwarves and the entire dwarven army were there with King James. Would the walls have been protected? Would they not have fallen? Would they have been able to defeat the others? Those are all good questions. The entire plague of the others, would that have lasted as long if the dwarves stuck with the people of the Lord of Light?
Would have much been lost too.
Yeah.
Because I think the dwarves are more technologically advanced.
Yep. Yeah, and that's where a lot of Elliot's backstory comes in, because of course he creates siege weapons to destroy the Red Keep. Yeah. So, and that's another thing too, is his destruction of the Red Keep. Though there was repairs being done to the Red Keep, there's not a whole lot of defense at the Battle of King's Fall as a result of that. Of course, that's before the drop happens too. So,
which I don't know if we hit this, but the Battle of the King's Fall is what we're naming the battle between King James and the other king, because both kings have fallen in this battle.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good. Man, there's so much here. Let's keep moving. So that's Elliot, and that is Geneva. There's another character called Lewith. We saw Lewith in Act 1 with Jennifer before she became the queen, before the drop happened. And Lewith is this really goofy character, right? He's with his friend named Torque, and both of these characters are based on a Key and Peele skit. And so I was playing Lewith, and Alex was playing Torque, and we were having fun doing it. But now, after the drop, Lewith believes that Torque is dead. If you remember in Act 1, Lewith and Torque were promised the Black Isles. Bryn of House Knox had persuaded them and told them they would get the Black Isles. And of course, we know Bryn rode in there, killed these men on sight. But they're on their way to the Black Isles, them and all the lucky men.
Yeah.
And as they're going to the Black Isles, they get caught up in the entirety of the Solari's invasion and the Knights of Meraxus. And so Lewith last sees Torque during this time, and he believes that Torque fell as a result of the drop. He hasn't seen him. He can't confirm that he's dead, but he believes he's dead.
Lewith is also not so goofy as he was before.
That's right.
Because he's not chipper, because he lost his friend. He probably lost many people he considered close with him. So he's still goofy, but it's not a happy goofy. He's still, like, without hope. And he's just a goofy person, so it's coming out through the hopelessness. But not in a humorous way, it's just who he is.
That's just who he is, yeah. And so you see loss has affected a character as goofy as Lewith. You see how the drop has affected him. Of course, some characters are getting a little bit annoyed with him in the tavern. And ultimately, Lewith says he has an employer, and he wants to get these maps to the Dread Pirate Roberts. And so this is right along their way, going north. The party agrees, we'll take these maps to Roberts. And so they head north. As they're heading north, they come into contact with this lurking figure. And the gray robes, there are two of them. And they can't make out who it is, and they really can't confront the lurking figure, because no sooner do they realize it and they start to make some strides to confront this figure, they run into the Dread Pirate Roberts. And so her airship is destroyed at this point. It's on land. It's unable to fly. And she's got her men. There's only a handful of them. And we learn that the Dread Pirate Roberts has actually been helping the effort to keep the harrowing from going into civilized areas. And so she's up there in the valley, what's left, the ruins of the valley. And she's up there trying to fend off the harrowing. And she's lost many of her men. She had an entire fleet of ships, and you just have airships and ruins all around. And so she's interested in the maps, and she's given the maps. But then more harrowing come, and she ends up leaving with what men are left. And so then you come into contact with the prince. You want to talk about the prince a little bit?
So the prince at this point, still hopeless from the fall of the king. Still, I think, trying to search for the king, but also...
Yeah, he doesn't believe the king is dead.
Yeah. That's all I really...
Yeah. Yeah, he doesn't believe the king is dead. He's kind of in denial. And so the party's trying to encourage him to come back to the valley, right? That's their mission from Queen Jennifer.
Yeah. She's trying to get him back so then he can go out and do, like, direct help to the new valley.
That's right. And he refuses. And so as they're arguing and they're trying to convince the prince to come back to the valley, new valley, a figure called Morningstar comes onto the scene. And Morningstar seems to be able to control the harrowing. And he's wielding a gunblade, which is interesting.
Yeah. First time we've seen that.
Yeah, so we're seeing technology advancing a little bit. Of course, guns of any sort are coming from Dwarven making, and so there's some implications that more and more dwarves have left the deserted lands as a result of the others no longer being there.
Or potentially been taken over by one of the invading armies.
Yeah, we don't know, but we know that this guy has a gunblade. He's called Morningstar. He's wearing a mask, and he's controlling harrowing. And so, Morningstar is trying to convince the prince to join the Knights of Meraxus. So Morningstar is a Knight of Meraxus and is trying to convince the prince to join. And the prince refuses, right? For whatever reason, the prince continues to say he serves a king already, and he doesn't need another king. And so you see that denial of the prince still coming out. And I'm just reminded, even with the character of the prince, of the story of Ezekiel 37, Valley of Dry Bones. In the Valley of Dry Bones, you have, and I'm going to butcher the quote here, I wish I would have opened it. You have a valley of dry bones, and Ezekiel saying, who will bring these bones back to life? And ultimately, God is communicating that he's going to raise the dead to life. And the imagery that we see in Ezekiel 37 is communicating our deadness in sin and our need for new life that only God can provide. But there's a moment where Ezekiel sees all these bones, and they're so dry. And he's asking, who can bring these to life? He's doubting. He's hopeless. It doesn't seem like anything will actually be able to bring these bones back to life. So I'm just reminded that with the prince. You saw the prince put a lot of hope and trust in his brother, the king. You saw a lot of what the prince was doing as a character, really trying to move towards appeasing King James. He wants to honor his family, and he wants to do well by his brother, and wants to serve his brother well. And ultimately, he's taken all the guilt and the pressure of King James dying to heart. He's blaming himself. And so you're seeing a lot of that come out in the character of Prince Cody. So he's interacting with Morningstar, and it's later revealed that Morningstar is Damien Solari. What's going on with that?
So, to begin with that, we've seen Damien, he lost, what was the angel Chow was playing?
Oh, Alistair.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Damien lost Alistair. Alistar? Alistar? We'll go with Alistar for consistency. So we see Damien lost Alistar in Thymeria fighting against his own kin, going to take down the Solari family as a... What is it?
Well, he was fighting with Bappa Backfire,
yeah.
And then he had Alistar and Crowley,
yeah.
which were his guardian angel and guardian demon. And
he was sent by the Lord of Light to take out his Solar, like the rest of his family.
Yeah, and
because he was the only follower of the Lord of Light.
Alistar gets killed.
Yeah, Alistar is killed in the battle. It was against.
Yeah, I can't remember who it was against.
Yeah.
Yeah, he died against one of the Solari. Yeah. We're not sure which one right now.
There's two of them there. I played.
Okay. Sabes and Angelo.
Yeah,
that's right.
Jared was Angelo. I was Sabes.
That's right.
Sabes had like gravity and meteor.
And Angelo's the one that killed
Alistar.
Because Sabes is the one that killed Finis Flashfire. Yeah. That's right.
Yeah, and Finis released the
draconic
poison.
gene. Yeah, and so it poisoned the draconic gene that kind of superpowered the Solari, which allowed them to die.
But it also superpowered Alistar and Crowley.
Yep.
So that superpower was removed, which is how Alistar died there.
Yep.
So then we see, through some backstory to the drop, Crowley fell to the drop. So then Damien already felt hopeless losing Finis and Alistar in the same battle. And then now he lost Crowley. And Alistar and Crowley were like mother and father to him.
Yep.
So he basically lost the two beings that were closest to him.
Yeah,
so
I mean...
now he's feeling forsaken, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, you had Agnes Solari, Father Solari, kind of disowned Damien, because Damien would not follow Dominus. He followed the Lord of Light. Mm-hmm. And so Alistar and Crowley are kind of like mother and father to him and caring for him. You know, in the scene where Alistar dies, and Finis died as well, you see Damien Solari bawling. He's crying, and he's questioning his calling.
Yeah.
And what was interesting about that scene was that you had Crowley as a mother kind of trying to encourage him to trust in the Lord of Light, which is interesting because Crowley's a demon. Mm-hmm. She mocks the Lord of Light openly. And so her and Alistar had a lot of issues as a result of that, because Alistar was an angel of the Lord of Light. But now, some backstory is Crowley fell victim to the drop. Mm-hmm. She died, and Alistar's already questioning his calling by the Lord of Light and has walked away.
Damien's questioning.
Damien is questioning it. Alistar's dead.
Yeah.
Damien's questioning his calling, and so he's kind of walked away from following after the Lord of Light. And so now you have him serving Meraxus, and he's a knight of Meraxus. And so he's interested in getting the prince to join the Knights of Meraxus, and he's interested in getting the sword that the prince has. The prince is wielding the sword that the king had in the final battle, which is a combination of dusk and dawn merged together.
Dusk being the prince's sword and dawn being the king's sword.
That's right. And so they merged those swords back together, and for whatever reason, Damien is interested in getting that sword. And so what ends up happening is the prince agrees to give over the sword if the party is able to live. And so the prince works that agreement out with Damien and hands over the sword. And that's how we closed season 2, or season 3, act 2 rather.
Yeah.
So yeah, wow, we're already 35 minutes in.
Wow.
Do you have any closing thoughts? I feel like we had a lot of content already.
We hit a lot of the points we were wanting to hit just going through the recap.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know for me, I just wanted to hit on, we had talked about 1 John in the beginning. Just want to hit on the king's death a little bit more. You guys know me, I'm a huge fan of allegory.
Yeah.
And we purposely thought through and wrote through season 3, act 2 in an allegorical way. And so reminded of John 15, where Jesus says in verses 13 and 14, greater love has no one than this, that someone lay down his life for his friends. And Jesus says, you are my friends if you do what I command you. You see in Proverbs 18:24, a man of many companions may come to ruin, but there is a friend who sticks closer than a brother. And so what's interesting about the king is the king, at first, when we see him in season 1, not a follower of the Lord of Light. He's skeptical, especially when he comes into contact with the sovereign. But along his journey, he starts to grow in belief and trust and faith in the Lord of Light. And what you see is a Christ-like figure in the king, in the sense that the king selflessly, on top of Ursine, the first time, Dahlia shields the life rune and becomes embedded with it. And so that was intentional to kind of point at substitutionary atonement. Jesus takes on the sins of the world. And so with the life rune being a fragment of Dominus, and Dominus being essentially the Satan-like figure, he's the liar, the deceiver, King James takes on that. And so substitutionary atonement is played out on top of Ursine. But then you see the completion of substitutionary atonement played out at the Battle of King's Fall, where he, once again, knowing what he has to do, sets his face to his Father in heaven, and then Dahlia shields himself. And of course, we see the repercussion is the drop. The king is not Jesus, so he doesn't know what's going to happen in any way. But what he is doing is trying to love and care for his friends well. He knows by sacrificing himself, and the king knew going into this battle he had to sacrifice himself. He knew this because the life room started whispering to him. And so Dominus is functioning through his fragmented soul and whispering to the king. And through prayer and fasting, the king finds out he has to sacrifice himself. And so similar to the Garden of Gethsemane, where Jesus is saying, Father, if it be your will, let this cup pass from me. And we see that played out at the Battle of King's Fall.
So good. And we hit it where the allegory is hitting the mark, and also where it falls short.
Where it falls short, yeah.
It's really good.
Well, guys, that is our thoughts. That's a little deeper look at Season 3, Act 2. We'd love to hear your thoughts. If you have anything that we missed, thinking through the characters, thinking through the story so far, please feel free to hit us up. We're going to post this in Slack, so go ahead and thread with some of your ideas, post some scripture verses. We hope that this is encouraging to you guys. We hope that you guys can see that we are not mindless consumers, but everything we do should be done to the glory of God. And so even in LARP and storytelling and role-playing, we should be doing so to the glory of God. Any closing thoughts?
I second all of that. And then also, with the hiatus we're kind of in because of COVID-19 and social distancing, this would be a great time too. Like, if you guys have any input towards story or character ideas, or like, oh man, this would be a great idea. Like, we already love to hear that during the season when it's in, but this hiatus is, I'm sure, giving people lots of time. So if you want to jot some backstory down to those characters, ideas, and send them our way, we would love that. Too, like, if you know how your character's thinking, and like you have some allegory or how your character's looking at the Lord of Light, and you want to send us those details, that would be great, because that'll give us even more content, because we'll know what your character's thinking. You don't have to give us everything, but we'd love just to hear, like, for example, like Rebecca Lee knows how Briar's thinking.
Yep.
I know how Ethan of House Marshall's thinking. Tila knows Jarl Siv. Like Chow knows Prince Cody, and that's just a few people. I know it's probably more than I was planning to name, but we would love to hear like where are your plans of taking these characters? What's their stance with the Lord of Light? Like, any allegory you guys are thinking through on an individual player basis for each character.
Yeah, that's good. And we're open to suggestions as far as the jump goes, the 5-year gap. If you've got any lore or ideas for certain events that could have transpired in this 5-year period of time where the king falls, and then you guys are currently playing in the current timeline, shoot us a Google Doc or something, and let's talk through it. But yeah, that's awesome.
I know Rebecca got you one already, right?
Yeah, Rebecca got one, and so that actually kind of encouraged us to want to encourage you guys to do the same. So yeah, be thinking through that, guys. We hope you guys will be able to engage LARP with a godly worldview, and until next time.
Yeah, later.
Hey, one final thought, guys. We know you thought you were done, but we are planning on doing some bonus content we're calling LARPcast Lorecast. So if you get us some backstory on your characters to what they've been doing for the 5-year gap, we'll end up spending maybe an entire episode on that character and what they've been going through, and point out some biblical principles within the character as well. Or we might pair together your character with another character. It just depends. But if you get us that content, we'll plan to do Lorecast. We're also planning on giving you some more world building episodes too, where we're talking more about what's been going on in that 5-year period of time. Okay, final thought. See you guys.
For real this time.